there, this is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. Today I'm going to discuss a very important topic, the ugly underbelly of Euro-secularization. Some may be cheering as they witness the rising wave of Euro-secularization, where many in Western societies have become increasingly atheistic, post-material, and secular. Ron Inglehart of the University of Michigan's World Values Surveys has distinguished these secular, rational, and self-expressive countries from the traditional religious and survival countries in other poorer parts of the world. Yet, although the West has experienced a sea change in growth over the past 200 years due to capitalism, industrialization, and our current knowledge economy, these trends are not without their ugly, moral underbellies of chaos. Without checks on this wave of progress and a return to order, we may fall victim to problems that have arisen in the past when societal values misaligned with human moral foundations. According to Ron Inglehart, on the first dimension, traditional values emphasize religiosity, national pride, respect for authority, obedience, and marriage. Secular rational values emphasize the opposite on each of these accounts. On the second dimension, survival values involve a priority of security over liberty, non-acceptance of homosexuality, abstinence from political action, distrust in outsiders, and a weak sense of happiness. Self-expression values imply the opposite on all these accounts. Accordingly, let us dive into history to offer a glimpse into the foundations upon which we have built Western Christian societies. Along these lines, I will offer a few points concerning the rise of Christianity and the many ways it has helped to shape our prosperity, order, and morality. Imagine living in the Roman Empire around 100 AD. Pagans placed very little value on human lives, often engaging in abortions, infanticides, child abandonment, human sacrifices, and suicides. These activities were prevalent for Romans and Greeks, as documented by Greeks, Romans, church fathers including Cicero, Polybius, Suetonius, Euripides, Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian, and Lactantius, the church father who tutored one of Constantine's sons. They further engaged in other forms of depravity, including bestiality, sexual immorality, idolatry, group sex, pederasty, and adultery. As an example, the 2nd century Latin author, Apulsius, speaks of Romans having sex with donkeys and of a woman who had sex with a bull. Archaeological findings have further presented evidence of such depravity as portrayed vividly on pagan household items such as frescoes, bowls, lamps, and cups. Emperors frequently held gladiatorial events where the losers were mauled to death by other gladiators or animals to the roaring cheers of the crowds. In the 1st century, the Roman writer Seneca commented on the way spectators roared at the gladiatorial events. "Kill him, lash him, brand him. Why does he meet the sword so cowardly a way? Why does he strike so feebly? Why doesn't he die game? Whip him to meet his wounds." Many Christians were appalled at the gladiatorial events, as they placed a much greater value on the human life. Tertullian, the church father in 220 AD, strongly admonished any Christians who attended the gladiatorial events in his book, De Spectaculis. Christ instructed his children to walk the moral high ground and to show full love for humanity. And I'll quote from Schmidt 2004, "It was Christianity's high value of human life, together with its belief that God has sent his Son, Jesus Christ, so that people might have life more abundantly both here and hereafter, that slowly undermined the gladiatorial contests." Christian Emperor Theodosius I eliminated gladiatorial contests in the East between 378 and 395, while his son Honorius eliminated them in the West in 404. Christians were also appalled at the immorality and lack of value placed on human life, which was so prevalent in the Roman Empire and in the Aztec and Inca empires, which they discovered later. Jesus called on one-on-one relationships between husbands and wives, while Paul highlighted the sanctity of the marital relationship in Ephesians 5:25. Marriage was seen as a sacred institution with dignity and honor. The pagan Libanius summed up the views towards Christian women's high level of commitment and dedication to their roles as wives and mothers. "What women these Christians have," he exclaimed. In contrast, Roman and Greek women were reputedly known for their adultery, lewd acts, and prostitution. Jesus exalted women throughout his ministry, often caring for them no matter their lowly positions and second-class citizenship in society. Women were the first to discover his empty tomb, according to all four Gospels, which is monumental considering the testimonies of women were not considered valid, as reported by Josephus. St. Paul further recognized several important women, including Junia and Phoebe, in the early church, and elevated them to equal status and treatment by their husbands in the home. Thanks to the seeds planted in the early church, we witness highly successful women in all walks of life today in the West, whether running large corporations, serving on corporate boards, or taking on the roles of presidents and prime ministers of their countries. The Christian treatment of women did not only manifest in the West. In Eastern civilizations, outcries from Christian missionaries led to the outlawing of female foot binding in China in 1912. The Christian British government ended the century-long practice of suti in 1829 in India, which is when Hindu widows are burned at a stake when their husbands pass away. Female genital mutilation, which is still practiced in the Arab region and in Africa, is outlawed in Western societies. Many in the West have decried this egregious practice. Women were also elevated in the classroom. Unlike the educational institutions of the time, which were primarily geared to elite males, Christians opened schools that were available to men and women of all classes. In 425, Emperor Theodosius II, a Christian, built a school of higher education that had 31 professors who taught Greek, Latin, law, and philosophy. According to William Ramsay, Christianity's aim was universal education, not education confined to the rich, as among Greeks and Romans, and it made no distinction of sex. Unlike their Roman counterparts, who routinely cast off their weakest, sickest, and poorest, Christians tended to them by establishing hospitals. They established the first institutionalized hospitals throughout the West, which served all. As an example, the nosocomia was built by St. Basil in Caesarea around 369. Roman comparables were considered hospitals, but they were only open to sick slaves, gladiators, and sometimes soldiers. Sick civilians had no place of refuge until Christians stepped in. Christians also established mental hospitals and monasteries to care for others. Political systems. In the early part of the last century, Max Weber wrote The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, where he identified reasons behind successful industrialization in Western Europe and the United States. He pointed to the Protestant appreciation for thrift by comparing many modest Protestant churches to much more elaborate Catholic churches throughout Europe. He further identified the Protestant desire to work hard and to prosper, which Protestants believe is consistent with the parable of the minas, many passages in the book of Proverbs, Acts, and the Pauline epistles. Capitalism, which puts money in the hands of entrepreneurial and innovative businessmen, has been heralded as transforming the West from primarily agrarian to today's knowledge economy. The political system contracts socialism, which puts control and power in the hands of the government, which is not as inclined to be efficient. Capitalism created and imbued a middle class, which is the building block of societies. Socialism often reduces the desire for hard workers to work hard, as individual rewards aren't as well recognized or compensated. The government has more control over pricing, and income is more evenly distributed between the rich and the poor via the redistribution of wealth. The natural motivation for humans to innovate, achieve, and reap rewards is therefore stifled under many socialist or communist systems. Capitalism is a product of individualism, which values individual achievement over equality of outcomes. The former describes the Christian experience over the past centuries, while the latter describes the forms of civilizations from which Christianity arose or within which it was persecuted. Witness the deaths of over 100 million people and the widespread persecution of the church in the last century under communist despots such as Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao Zedong. St. Paul elevated individuals in his letter to the Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians 15:23 it states, "But each in his own order, Christ the firstfruits, then at his coming those who belong to Christ." He further chastised the lazy within the early church, warning them if they didn't work, they wouldn't eat. In his letter to the Romans 12:6-8, Paul said that having gifts that differ according to the grace given us, let us use them, if prophecy in proportion to our faith, in service in our serving, the one who teaches in his teaching, the one who exhorts in his exhortation, the one who contributes in generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who acts of mercy with cheerfulness. In the book of Luke, Jesus added, "To whom much has been given, much will be expected." In other words, Christians are called to capitalize on their individual spiritual gifts in their work for the kingdom. Proportionality is valued. In summary, Christianity has been instrumental in advocating for private ownership, innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship, and these systems have enabled many in the globe to survive and thrive. Yet with every great achievement comes a great setback, and with order comes chaos. Some scary social outcomes of Euro-secularization will next be mentioned. In an odd flashback to the Roman Empire, the rise of secularization in Europe has coincided with a rise in sexually perverted or humanely insensitive, egregious acts there. Examples include an increase in zoophilia, a new industry of sex doll brothels, legalized prostitution, and an increase in pro-choice abortion measures, such as in Ireland. Without a moral foundation or external authority who forbids sexually deviant acts or the murder of the innocent, the increasingly atheistic and wealthy countries of Northern and Western Europe have become less adherent to purity and the sanctity of life. Too many social safety nets and generous welfare systems have led to more single parents, as social safety nets rather than spouses can provide for children. Too many social safety nets have also led many from the churches, as social safety nets have taken their places. Animal rights supporters have expressed tremendous concern over the rise in bestiality brothels in several countries of Europe, including Germany and Denmark, where opponents have challenged the law. Bestiality, which occurs when people have sex with animals, is legally protected in Sweden, Finland, Hungary, and Denmark. Studies have linked it with a greater propensity for sexual violence between people. Sex doll brothels are also popping up in Europe. For a fee, patrons can spend an allotted amount of time in a private room with a sex doll primarily constructed from rubber. Supporters of this dehumanizing industry are in the United Kingdom, Paris, Barcelona, and Denmark. Transgenderism in children is also on the rise. According to the United Kingdom Government Equalities Office, cited in Bannister 2018, between 2009 and 10 and 2017-18, the number of girls referred to doctors for gender treatment rose 4,415%, from 40 to 1,806. The number of boys rose by 1,151%, from 57 to 713. In 2017, 800 children were given drugs to stall the onset of puberty, including some who were only 10 years old. 45 who were 6 years or under were referred to the UK's National Health Service for treatment, including one who was only 4 years of age. Finally, abortion is legal in almost every country of the European Union, though some countries, such as Poland, have restrictions that limit when and why women can have abortions. Malta has outlawed it completely. I was pro-choice on abortion up until I became pregnant with my second son. During an ultrasound, I was informed that he had 2 soft markers for Down syndrome, an echogenic heart and echogenic bowels. I had opted to have an amniocentesis at the time, so I sat on pins and needles for about a week before I learned of the results. The nurses informed me that they could tell he was a son. At around 12 weeks, they could easily determine his gender. You can see these photos. These are of my son, and this is what I saw when the nurses informed me that if he did have Down syndrome, I could certainly terminate the pregnancy. That bothered me. Look at the little human inside of me. The last thing I was going to do was kill him. I became pro-life as I scoured the internet over the next few days to find out what being the mother of a boy with Down syndrome would entail. My husband and I decided, no matter his condition, he was our son and we were giving birth to him. He was born without Down syndrome. On February 25th, 2019, Senate Democrats defeated a GOP attempt to advance legislation that would clarify that babies who survived attempted abortions must receive medical care. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act is detailed on congress.gov as follows. This bill amends the Federal Criminal Code to require any healthcare practitioner who is present when a child is born alive following an abortion or attempted abortion to 1, exercise the same degree of care as reasonably provided to any other child born alive at the same gestational age, and 2, ensure that such child is immediately admitted to a hospital. The term born alive means the complete expulsion or extraction from his or her mother at any stage of development, who, after such expulsion or extraction, breathes or has a beating heart, pulsation of the umbilical cord, or definite movement of voluntary muscles, regardless of whether the umbilical cord has been cut. Also, a healthcare practitioner or other employee who has knowledge of a failure to comply with these requirements must immediately report such failure to an appropriate law enforcement agency. An individual who violates the provisions of this bill is subject to a criminal fine up to 5 years in prison or both. An individual who commits an overt act that kills a child born alive is subject to criminal prosecution for murder. The bill bars the criminal prosecution of a mother of a child born alive for conspiracy to violate these provisions, for being an accessory after the fact, or for concealment of felony. A woman who undergoes an abortion or attempted abortion may file a civil action for damages against an individual who violates this bill. In summary, this bill had the potential to clarify protections for babies who survived botched abortions, and 44 Democrats rejected it. Furthermore, several states of the late are considering ways to loosen up laws concerning third trimester abortions. According to the Guttmacher Institute, 9% of women have abortions after their first trimester, and slightly more than 1% are performed at 21 weeks or later. One study indicated that women who have abortions after 13 weeks are women with lower education levels, women who have had 3 or more disruptive events in their lives, such as a separation from a spouse or unemployment, and Black women. The characteristics of women who have abortions after 16 weeks includes Black women, women with health insurance that could find or fund the procedure, and those with higher incomes. When she was 31 weeks pregnant, Erica Christensen discovered the baby she was carrying would not be able to survive outside of the womb. In New York, where she resided at the time in 2016, abortions after 24 weeks were illegal unless the mother's life was immediately in jeopardy. So she flew to Colorado and had a doctor give her baby an injection that stopped his heartbeat, but prevented her from going into labor. Then she returned to New York and gave birth to her dead son. New York recently passed the Reproductive Health Act, which removes barriers for women who want abortions after 24 weeks when the fetus is not viable. So today, Erica would not have had to travel to Colorado to have her abortion. Why would a woman in her position not have chosen to induce labor so that at least she and her husband could hold and hug her son alive, even if only once, is beyond me. Babies are almost fully developed at 31 weeks. Many are born at 31 weeks. Are these signs of progress or regress? Think about this. Think about what we're doing to our society and our family. Are we shaping the world in positive ways? Political commentator Ben Shapiro often faces large crowds of people, and his stance on pro-life is prolific. Let's listen to what he says in response to someone who questions him.
And good things are still good, even if I'm a white girl off religious man. This is one of these identity politics points that I really, I don't mean to come down harshly on you, I don't, but it is a point that I really have serious moral qualms with. I think it's quite terrible. The reason being that the people who were fighting against enslavement of Black people were a bunch of well-off white men for the most part. Right? And those people were saying this is a moral sin. This is a moral blot. They weren't living in the South. They didn't own plantations. They didn't live the lives of the plantation owners. They said this is evil and we are here to stop it. Right? When you see something that you think is morally wrong happening, especially when you're talking about the taking of a human life, like listen, I think that you shouldn't go around randomly killing homeless people. I just have this view. I'm not a homeless person. Most of the people who randomly kill homeless people are probably not of my economic strata, my religious view, or my I don't know whether they're of my skin color or not. I have no idea what the actual sociological breakdown of homeless killer serial murderers is. But I would suggest that my identity has nothing to do with what is right or wrong. And this is what Western civilization used to be about. Western civilization used to be about the idea that, yes, I'm not a woman in the healthcare field, but you and I can have a conversation about what's right and wrong because this is the nature of human reason. The nature of human reason, the nature of right and wrong, is that you and I can talk about what's right and wrong and that I don't retreat into my identity. If we can all retreat into our identity and our morality is now centered around that identity, morality doesn't exist at all. We break down into a society of fragmented atoms where I can't even say, like, you're torturing a puppy in your backyard. I have nothing to say about that. I'm not a white woman who's in the healthcare field. I'm not going to do that. I refuse to surrender the idea that I can have a moral stance on issues that are of concern to society and of concern to the well-being of the United States simply because of the color of my skin or the nature of my genitalia. And honestly, I believe any view that feels differently is sexist, racist, and bigoted.
So I have an issue with your stance on abortion.
Okay.
Right. So you define life as starting at conception through biology, pretty much. But I think you take the stance that life is intrinsically valuable because it's life. And that's where I disagree. I think there's two things that make life valuable. I think consciousness, the ability to experience pain, senses, and stuff like that, and personal identity. In particular, psychological continuity identity. So the fact that we have memories, we have relationships, people have relationships to us. I think those are
Do you need both of those, or is it neither or? I just want to clarify your position.
Either or.
Okay, so if it's either or, then people with Alzheimer's have real continuity problems. You can't kill them.
No, because people still have relationships with them, though, right? So like just because you have like...
I mean, you have a relationship with them, but with people with advanced stage Alzheimer's, they really don't have a relationship.
Okay, but for the sake of example, like let's say someone dies, right? The family gets to decide what you do with the body. Because I know what you say. When you say someone says, oh, it's just consciousness, and then they're brain dead, you say, well, can you stab them? No, you can't. Because that's the family's decision what to do with the body. It's the person's decision what they want to do.
So if the family decides to stab them, it's okay to stab the
when they're brain dead? Yeah, if they want to
No, not brain dead. Let's say that you're comatose for a specifically and predictably short period of time, say 9 months.
Say now, well, what is the person... yeah. No. So I would say on the legal grounds, it would depend what the person put in their will. If the person has made clear statements like, hey, don't pull the plug on 9 months, then don't do that. Because I think the first choice is...
Right, but let's say the person has not made such clear statements. Say the person can't make such clear statements.
So and he's just in a complete coma?
Let's say the person has not drawn up a living will or had conversations like this. They're in a car crash, they get in a coma, you know that in 9 months they're going to come out of the coma, and they're going to be fine. Are you allowed to stab? Can the family say, you know what, these 9 months, stab the dude.
Wait, so they're fine, so they're going to get their mememories back?
Let's say they don't get their memories back.
Then I would say then that person is dead. And yeah, if the family wants to pull the plug, that's fine. I would have no problem with that, yeah. No, I would have no problem with that. Because that person is dead.
You're getting into some dicey territory, dude.
No, I think that person is dead. Right? And that's the best way to define life, is personal identity and consciousness. That's what makes life valuable.
Right, so I think that, again, if you were to say both, that's too much. And if you were even to say either, I don't think either one of those legs stands on its own. Okay, because what you really mean, this is the thing about having a baby. It's a process of development. Right? And this is the point that I'm making. There's a period in this human life when that child does not have, or fetus or embryo, whatever you want to call it, when this living thing does not have consciousness and does not have a sense of identity. But in 9 months, it will have consciousness.
Well,
and even then, by the way,
babies
don't have a sense of identity for at least a certain number of months after they're born. And when
So we will leave it there. Ben Shapiro is obviously an expert in these kind of fields. He's got a lot of great opinions, and I completely agree with him in many issues. So let's ask the question again. Are these signs of moral progress or regress? I suspect we're only in the infant stages of Euro-secularization, and I fear what lies ahead. If the European Empire follows the footsteps of our Roman predecessors, we're in for trouble. History often repeats itself. In that case, we can expect to witness the legalization of pederasty, late-term abortions, infanticides, and child abandonment. We can expect to check the sanctity of our bodies at the door as we move into a room in which people inflict abhorrent acts upon one another, and no one seems the least bit bothered, as their consciences have been seared. We can expect a sea of gender-fluid children populating our elementary schools, where everyone is curious and no one seeks an understanding of or conformity to their biological identities. And perhaps most extreme, we can expect the return of Colosseum-style battles in which prisoners of war are hauled out in front of roaring crowds to be mauled for human pleasure. These are the outgrowths in societies in which morality is constantly being tested, and people keep accepting practices that go against their moral instincts. Before advocates of Euro-secularization rejoice trends away from religion and tradition, it may be useful to consider the secular utility of religion, particularly of Christianity. The moral foundation upon which prosperity in Europe and North America has been built stands to be shattered in coming years, with a rise in deviance away from our moral sensibilities. Christianity calls for sanctity, purity, and a focus on love and order. Euro-secularization may result in chaos and little appreciation for order and the sanctity of the human body. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you'll like and subscribe and share this video with your friends. You can find me at Christian-apologist.com, or you can find me on social media on Twitter at LEAD1225. This is S.J. Thomason signing off. Thank you.